I wanted to share a short story with y'all today about an experience that I had in my first year of college, my freshman year. In my life, I don't know if there was a more clear moment where there were two things that I deeply, deeply desired. I wanted to know people. I wanted to know the campus. I wanted to know the culture. I wanted to know where I was. And I so very deeply wanted to be known by others. I felt like I knew very little, and I knew very few people knew me. It was a new place. I knew like two people who were there, and of course, as it turns out, the people that you know you never actually see once you get to campus. And it was a little bit overwhelming to me. I'm an extrovert. I love meeting people. I love small talk. So it wasn't that as much as it was just everything else. Everything was so new. Everything was unfamiliar. Everything felt uncomfortable. There was no history. There was no shared story. And so I found myself talking a lot about home, specifically my best friend. I would like awkwardly and randomly drop her name in the middle of conversations. He would be like, oh yeah, roller coasters are really cool. I'm like, yeah, me and my best friend Naomi once went to an amusement park. It was nice. I had no idea why, but I couldn't stop myself from just dropping her name into conversations. And, I think looking back on it now, I was crying out for something. There was that feeling of familiarity, that feeling of, inside jokes, good times together, nostalgia. But more than that, there was for me not needing to explain myself when I started laughing hysterically or crying in the same way. Not having to make excuses and just knowing that someone there knew who I was and trusted me and still actually wanted to be my friend. The need to know others and the need to be fully known was so incredibly present. The great author, Maya Angelou, she describes it poignantly in this quote. She says, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you." This inimitable woman, she understood the power of telling her story. She understood the weight of being known, but not until she experienced the agony and the pain of being unknown and of being silent. The heaviest part of her heart, the heaviest part of herself sat shrouded in silence. A burden of shame that was not hers to carry affected every part of her life for years. In the late 1960s, as a survivor of suffering beyond my imagination and a true warrior of hope, Maya Angelou gives words to her untold story inside of her as she writes and publishes her book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. She speaks of her own story of rape, racial discrimination, and perseverance. She speaks of evil, she speaks of injustice, and she tells a story of hope, and she tells a story of freedom. And we feel the power of her stories still. Even to this day, as we read that quote together, as we hear that quote, we feel her power. We experience a bit of her wit, we experience her wisdom, we experience her grace, and we carry some of her pain. We catch some of her hope, and it matters so deeply. It matters for her, but it also matters for us. We are a changed people. When you read that book, or when you read others like it, of people just sharing their stories with you, we're changed because, yes, we've heard something extraordinary, But I think mostly because we've heard something that's simply true. And we carry that truth with us. And we all know the power of stories in our lives. How many of you loved reading time in elementary and or grade school, whatever you called it? Raise them high, raise them proud. Yes, there it is. I love it. It was my favorite part of the day every single day. I lived for it. There was something about sitting around in a circle and discovering something together. Really discovering characters together, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and following them on whatever adventures they were taking that day. A classroom favorite of mine was Charlotte's Web. Right? Movie or book, it was good stuff. So for those of you who don't remember, or maybe tragedy, have never read or seen it, let me recap it for you. Wilbur is the main character of the story. He's a pig. He is the runt of his litter. So from the very beginning, his life is in jeopardy. He's rescued by his kind owner, Fern, and is sent off to another farm. And there he meets a lot of new people, and by people, I mean animals. And they become fast friends. His closest friend in this new place is a kind, compassionate, and wise spider named Charlotte. Things are great for Wilbur on this new farm until they discover that he's going to become Christmas dinner. And this simply cannot be so. So Charlotte the spider takes it upon herself to save Wilbur's life. Now these two are good friends. She's seen Wilbur at his very worst. She's confronted him about his ignorance and about his pride. But when it comes to saving his life and spreading this public story, she tells an untold story of this pig named Wilbur with the words spectacular, radiant, humble. She speaks these words, or really writes these words in her web above Wilbur. And it matters deeply for him. She's a good friend in every way, speaking words of truth. But those words of affirmation, those are the words that save Wilbur's life. They change him and they anchor their friendship. He aspires to be those things that Charlotte sees in him in increasing measure. And I think that strikes a chord with what I felt in my freshman year. To have someone who knows me at my very worst and someone who knows me at my very best, just speak words over me, words of truth and words of love. And for Wilbur, in those words that are written over him, he hears something true and he carries it with him. Tonight, I'd love to share a story with you, and in it you will hear something true. And my hope and my prayer is that it is something that we carry out of here with us tonight. We're going to look at a passage from John chapter 4. John chapter 4, verses 7 to 9. The passage says, "A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, 'Give me a drink,' for the disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, 'How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?' For Jews," and this is a little added information from the author, "for Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." We're going to stop there for just a little bit. Jesus initiates this amazing conversation with this woman, and it's amazing on a few different counts. It's amazing because in this cultural context, right, she is a woman, and he strikes up this conversation with her, engages her in conversation. And in this time period, maybe even more surprisingly, absolutely more surprisingly, is that she was a Samaritan woman. And Jesus asks her to share a drink with him. In this time period, a shared drink of water between a Jewish person and a Samaritan person was considered more than taboo. It was unheard of. But Jesus, always incredibly intentional, had a larger purpose in mind when he started this conversation with this woman. And I want us to just listen in on this astonishing conversation. So she asks him a direct question, right? How can you ask me for a drink of water? And he answers a bit cryptically. He says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. She responds, sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well, right? This is Jacob's well. And he drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. We're starting to see two different conversations emerging here. Jesus goes on to say, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. She responds, sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. Right? Two different conversations. Jesus is speaking in metaphor, and it's beautiful, really. Do you hear that? Living water, a spring of living water, leading to eternal life. You'll never be thirsty again. This is satisfying. This is good. This is life-giving. And she's talking about the actual literal well before her, right? She's talking about its historical significance and how much of a pain it is to walk up there every day and get water. So if you've got a better source, you better hook me up, is what she's saying to him. He's desiring to give her so much more. He has a larger purpose in mind than simply talking about the water cooler, as it were. Jesus is talking about what it means to know him, right? He raises the question right from the outset. He said, if you knew who it is that is saying to you, begging her to ask him, who are you? And yet she is direct about the well that is before her. And who is this that is speaking to her? He is the promised one. He is the rescuer, but she can't see him rightly, even though he is standing before her. There are some barriers, right? Some barriers in understanding. They're having two different conversations. And so Jesus changes tracks and he starts telling her a new story. And again, it's a surprising one. He says, go call your husband and come here. I have no husband, she responds. Jesus says, you are right in saying, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have, is not your husband. What you have said is true. Startling truth. Right? It's a little awkward. Let's just get it out there, right? Startling truth from Jesus in this scene. He's placed some larger truths now for her to consider. It was presented as a gift, but something else needed to happen. There was a larger story, a greater astonishment, greater than the fact that she was a woman, greater than the fact that she was a Samaritan, greater than all the other cultural distinctions that separated these two people. She had an untold story inside of her. We lack all of the details, but by our understanding, it was one that probably excluded her from being known, probably excluded her from intimacy, something that made that walk to the well feel so much farther than it did for the other women of the town. But there was something distinct, something different about this man. You see, he talked to her. He wasn't whispering about her behind her back. He didn't speak at her. He wasn't just another guy in the long line of men who had hurt her or who had left her. He conversed with her. He engaged her heart and her mind, and then he proved why he was worth her time. He knew her untold story, and he told it back to her. And knowing all of these things about her, he spoke to her. Not words of pain, not words that cut deeply, but words about water. Life-giving, thirst-quenching, soul-reviving water. And just like Charlotte the spider, her words for Wilbur, they carried so much weight. Why? Because she knew him at his worst and at his best and spoke these words of affirmation and blessing over him. Jesus told her a story of compassion and kindness, a story of redemption and opportunity and promise. This is the life available in me. It is a wellspring of living water. She is changed because of the words that are spoken over her by someone who knows her. She heard something that's true about herself, and yes, it was hard to hear, but it validated the message that he had presented previously. It validated the other truths that she had heard from this man around the well that she couldn't quite understand. He knew her, and he welcomed her to a life that was rich and to a life that was abundant. And man, did she carry that story with her. She carried it back to the most surprising place. She carried it back to a town that was content to let her go to the well by herself. She carried it back to a town that knew her story, knew her background. And here's one of the last things that we hear about this woman. Many Samaritans from that town, from her town, believed in him, believed in Jesus, because of the woman's testimony. And then this simple quote, he told me all that I ever did. He told me all that I ever did. And in that, don't you hear this finally? This release like you were holding your breath. Finally, someone didn't ignore the pain from my past. Didn't use my past as all the excuse they needed to exclude me. Didn't leave me in the agony of loneliness. Didn't shame me into the inevitability of repeated mistakes, repeated regrets, in the agony of being unknown. No, he spoke a better story over me of life. And then he let me know that it was uniquely for me. Not apart from my choices, not apart from my circumstances, but a part and parcel of who I have been. I get to be who he says I can be in him. Talk about the power of a story. We hear it echo around her. Other people believed because of her story. Because if she can meet Jesus and be free to be who she was and who she now is, and have hope for a different life, then man, I want in on that. And that's what we see happen when she carries this story back to her town. So what about us, right? Maybe we feel the weight of the untold story inside of us. Maybe you feel the ache, the longing for someone who knows you, where you don't need to keep your guard up. You're not constantly trying to get someone to like you or to be someone that others will respect. And here's the truth for us. God knows you. God knows you. Let that free you up to be known by him and to be known by others. In small ways, through honest conversation. You don't need to tell your life story and your deepest struggles to every person in this room, right? Might not be recommended. But start by being honest, right? First with God, and then with his people, with your close friends, with the ones who know you, love you, with those that you trust. It's not just an empty truth, this truth that God knows us. It's not just floating out there. God's truth, God's message always lands with people. And it lands with this woman at Jacob's well in John 4. and it lands with the people who are gathered in this room tonight. Whatever story you walked in here with, whatever thoughts and desires you're battling as you walk around trying to be the perfect student, the perfect son, the perfect daughter, the perfect athlete, the perfect roommate, the perfect future version of yourself. Whatever exhausting mask you have felt the need to wear, and we all feel it in different ways, right? Know one another and be known here at Princeton. Princeton does so many things well. Number one in the country, am I right? But something about that, something about, on the whole, seems to be lacking when it comes to the freedom of really being honest, right? And that's a culture we create, and that's a culture that we participate in. The honesty to ask, I'm super anxious about my precept tomorrow. I just read 200 pages and I have no idea what's happening, right? The honesty to ask, I just want my best friend, my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister to be here. I just want someone who knows me to be close. The honesty to ask, how do you process stuff that's going on at home when you have so much schoolwork to do that fills your day? Because even though we're here in the orange bubble, life goes on around us. And the cry that comes from our hearts of, I just don't know if I belong here. Jesus might not literally be sitting with you at a well, where you are sitting and remembering current circumstances, past decisions, past regrets. But someone in this room can. Someone in this room should sit with you and hear your story. Believe that God has brought you here tonight to hear this truth, that He knows you and He wants you to know Him. He's not forgotten. He's not given up. He has something better for you. And we must speak that truth. We must speak that truth to one another. And remind each other that Jesus speaks a better story over us today. Your untold story matters. It matters who you are. It matters what you've walked through, for better or for worse. But the untold story, the agony that you feel, the shame that you carry, it need not be before Jesus. See, He is God, but He is not a God from a distance. He dons the flesh of His creation, and He comes to the well where you daily gather sustenance. He comes to the places that speak affirmation. He comes to the places around us that speak validation. He comes to the places that say, you've made it, you're great, just, act perfect and hide all the other stuff that makes you feel heavy, that makes you feel lonely. And He says, no, I know you. See, I know you, and I've got a better story than shame. I've got a better story than guilt. I've got a better story than rejection, and I've got a better story than confusion. I've got a better story than the need, than being consumed by the need to succeed in the classroom, to fit in, to feel normal, to feel anything but normal, to excel on the court or on the field. He speaks of Himself in relationship with the real you, to bring you new life. By believing that He is who He says He is, God in the flesh, come to restore right relationship with you, to be fully known, and to have your story redeemed. That is something true. Carry that message with you tonight. And if there's something that is compelling in that message to you as it is to me, then respond to it. Respond to it with conversations with each other at and after post-encounter tonight. Respond to it by turning to Jesus, maybe for the first time, to fully know Him and to be fully known by Him. Respond to it by signing up for a Bible course this year, for committing to walking with others in this pursuit of knowing God, knowing others around you in community, and knowing who you are in light of what God says. You don't need to fix your life first. Come and be known. Guys, we get to be so very different than the campus around us. We get to be so very different than the world around us. We get to live free, simply free of all of the expectations of perfection that everyone else is buying and selling. That is a compelling story for us to tell. He tells you all that he ever did, and he wants you. That's something we can carry with us and expect that others will want to share it. There is a deep longing that we have to be known, to have the people who know us speak better truths over our lives. We have these deepest desires that can only be met by one, namely Jesus. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. But there is great joy to be found in being known by a God who deeply desires for you to know him.